Hi, and welcome back to Not Backpacking. Now, I'm super excited to announce that we have an upcoming trip in just over a week. The passports have been updated, we have a house sitter organized,
Better call the cat sitter.
we have our flights booked, we have our activities arranged, and we're ready to hop on the plane. But first, let's talk dollars. Now, our trip involves 11 days of traveling on our own and then 5 days with family toward the end of our trip. Now, spending that time with family does mean we won't be paying for hotel accommodation for those few days, and that does mean the trip works out a little bit cheaper than it would be otherwise. Still, our budget for this trip is around 610 New Zealand dollars a day. That's around 380 US dollars a day. Now, what sits behind that relatively expensive trip? Here's how it breaks down. The biggest cost is our flights to get to the destination. Accommodation accounts for around a quarter of total spend, and then we spend about 20% or 1/5 of total cost on food. Because we'll need to hire a car for this trip, and we have already arranged that, I'll talk about that more in a future video, that comes in around 16% of total cost. And then the actual activities that we'll pay to do while we're over there are relatively inexpensive as a share of the total. Our flights were really expensive because there's effectively a monopoly on this route. So even though we booked many months ago, I think about 8 months ago, we paid a lot of money for a relatively short trip. Once you strip out flights, we're down to about 280 US dollars a day, but that includes all our other expenses. So a one-way trip on a rental car, which obviously costs more than if you return it to the same location you picked it up, all our activities, all our paid accommodation, all our meals. We're renting a vehicle for 16 days. We're driving it around 1,100 miles over that time period and then returning it to a different location. So that does work out quite expensive at about 45 US dollars a day for a very basic vehicle, but that's because we're paying for that one-way fee. Now, there's another whole story about how we switched rental car companies at the last millisecond because of a whole bunch of extra hidden costs by the company that we first booked with, but that'll be a story for another video.
You're opening up a can of worms.
So what's the plan? Well, we will be flying into the Sunshine Coast, which is a little bit north of Brisbane on Australia's eastern seaboard. The Sunshine Coast is known, as its name suggests, for its balmy weather. It'll be around 28 degrees even in October. When we fly over there, that's around 82 Fahrenheit. We'll spend a few days on the Sunshine Coast, mostly checking out outdoor activities before driving down to Australia Zoo, made famous by Steve Irwin and his family who've been associated with that zoo for a long time. Then it's a drive through Brisbane to the Gold Coast, which is famous for its waterfront high-rise apartment buildings and its many theme parks. Obviously, we'll review all those theme parks for you, and we'll be checking out several local restaurants and giving our opinions on those as well. We'll end our trip by spending some time with family, but Australia is a huge place, so we'll drive another 600 or 700 miles to get from the Gold Coast down to where our family live. That'll give us plenty of opportunity to check out a whole bunch of other places, stay at a bunch of different hotels, and do a number of activities that we'll share with you. But why Australia? Firstly, Australia is only 3 to 4 hours away from New Zealand, and so we've visited there a bunch of times, but it's typically been to visit family or to go there on work trips, and we haven't really explored a huge amount of that country, even though we've traveled all over the world. So this is an opportunity to set that right by exploring several hundred miles of the eastern seaboard. A second reason that we're picking this holiday right now is that most of the holidays that we go on are really structured. You've seen some of my spreadsheets if you've been following the channel for a while. You've seen that we tend to plan things down to the minute. We've still got a spreadsheet, and I'll share that with you in a later video, but we're looking forward to a holiday where we're taking a relatively relaxed approach to each day's activities. A third reason to be visiting Australia, and particularly at this time of year, is we've just come out of a really wet and cold winter here in the Southern Hemisphere, and we're looking forward to some sun, some outdoor activities, and a lot of water play. But a fourth reason that we're visiting Australia, and one that's really interesting for me, is to try to get to grips with more of the relationship between Australia and New Zealand. Now, if you know about that relationship, you will know that New Zealand and Australia have a very strong bond. Soldiers from these two countries have typically fought and fallen side by side in wars around the world. We share a lot of things in common. But at the same time, we have a really strong rivalry when it comes to the sport field, politics, or our economies. For decades, New Zealand has been dealing with what we call the brain drain, where New Zealanders leave in their thousands or even tens of thousands per year for greener pastures in Australia. Australia styles itself as the lucky country, and an estimated 700,000 New Zealanders, that's about 10 to 15% of our population, call Australia home. These are people who are hoping to try their hands in that economy, hoping for a better life.
Show me the money.
This general move of thousands of New Zealanders to Australia and very few Australians coming back the other way has become highly contentious. In one of the most witty and simultaneously insulting quips by a politician you'll ever hear, a former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Robert Muldoon, once famously said that New Zealanders leaving for Australia raised the average IQ on both sides of the Tasman Sea.
Yes, very funny, very funny.
So we're going through a period in our history right now where tens of thousands of New Zealanders are moving to Australia every single year. I'm hoping we'll get to talk to some of those Kiwis who have made the move and to find out if things have panned out the way they expected, what's worked out better or what's worked out worse for them. Failing that, I'm hoping that we'll learn a lot ourselves about how life is different or similar as we travel down the eastern half of the country. So join us as we travel across the ditch to visit our cousins over in Australia and to learn more about what that country has to offer. We'll keep you updated as we travel. Take care. We'll speak again soon.